Welcome to the session on practicing darning and patching. Let us look at the objectives of this session. At the end of this session, you will be able to darn a tear and a hole, stitch a plain patch, a hemmed patch, and a decorative patch. The required tools and materials for darning and patching are darning needle, hand needle, worn out garment, patcher, threads, tailor's scissors, tailor's chalk, sewing machine. Now, let's learn darning a tear and a hole. First, study the weave of the fabric and the cut position carefully. Then, mark lines all around the cut, maintaining an equal distance of approximately 0.5 cm to 1 cm on all sides. Use these marks as a guidance for darning. Draw both edges of the cut together with an open fishbone stitch. On the wrong side, start to darn on marks rectangular to the cut. For this, use the darning needle and, if possible, use thread from the same fabric. Make sure to draw threads from the underside of the garment, that is, hem or facing, etc. For best results, use a warp thread if you darn in the warp direction and a weft thread if you darn in the weft direction. Darn according to the weave of the fabric, that is, one thread up and one thread down. Leave loops at the end of the row of stitches. Provide longer loops at each alternate row of the stitches for shrinking. Next, let's learn the darning of a triangular cut. For the triangular cut, follow the same method as the straight cut. Then, start working on the weft way first. Then, weave in warp direction through the previous stitches. Now, the stitches will overlap at the corner. Next, let's learn the darning of a hole. For darning a hole, first trim the edges of a hole so that a rectangular shape is visible. Also, trim the worn out places around the hole. Now, darn the holes where the darning should extend the hole on all sides by several stitches. Finally, weave with alternating stitches. Now, let's look at patching instructions for garment repair. First, select a patch. The patch should be of the same material as the garment. Once the fabric is figured, cut the patch to match the designs. If the material is to be durable, it should be of the same weight and texture as the garment. Always cut a patch on the straight of the fabric and match the grain of the patch to the grains of the garment. Now, let's look at the stitching of a plain patch. Independent of the shape of the hole, the patch has to be square or rectangular, based with a regular or square shape around the worn-out place or hole. Trim the edges around the hole to match the shape of the basting and leave 1 cm inside from the basting. Clip 1 cm diagonal cuts at each corner. Fold back the edges to the wrong side of the garment. Press flat and be careful not to stretch the edges. Place the cutout part on the patch fabric and mark the outlines. Add 1 cm seam allowance all around. Mark again and cut the outer lines, based on the inner rectangular shape. Place the patch in position with right sides of the fabric together. Keep the hole in the middle, matching the basting lines on the garment and the patch. Fix the patch first with basting stitches on the previous basting lines. Then, stitch by hand or with machine stitches close to the basting lines. Take care to tuck the clipped corners carefully. Press open the seam allowances and trim off the corners. Finish the seam allowance with overcasting and remove basting. Next, let's learn to stitch a hemmed patch. For hemmed patch, add a bigger seam allowance to the patch piece. That is, add 1.5 cm instead of 1 cm. Attach the patch similar to the plain patch. Trim the corners of the garment seam allowance. Press both seam allowances flat on the garment. Turn the patch seam allowance by 0.5 cm to the underside. Baste it to the garment. Then hem it with slip stitch. Finally, remove the basting. Finally, let's learn how to stitch a decorative patch. Decorative patches are attached to the right area of the garment. Select a color contrasting with dress fabric and draw a design on paper. The shape of the design should cover the damaged portion in the dress properly. Pin the paper on the patch fabric for cutting the patch. Cut through both paper and fabric together on the drawn shape. Baste patch in place. Set running stitches on the outer edges of patch. Finish with close buttonhole stitches covering the running stitches. Trim the edges of the garment at the damaged portion from underside. Leave 1 cm seam allowance. Finish it with overcasting. Finally, decorate the patch with embroidery stitches. Let's recap the key points discussed. Study the weave of the fabric and the cut position carefully before darning. Use warp thread if you darn in warp direction and weft thread if you darn in weft direction. A patch should be of the same material as the garment, independent of the shape of the hole. The patch has to be square or rectangular. This brings us to the end of the session. Hope you have gained a good understanding about practicing darning and patching. See you in the next session.